Well, good morning, everyone. Philip Hill from Landmark here. Before I get going, I'd just like to do a quick audio visual check. So if you can see the slide with the Searches UK logo in the top left-hand corner, and my name and today's date in the bottom left-hand corner, as well as hear me, if you can type in either your questions box, I think it's the questions box, or your chat box. Let me just type in here. Can you hear me? Can hear you. Yeah, I always do this. Well, I can't remember the last time we had any technology related problems, but it still doesn't hurt to check. There you go. Yeah, loud. Oh, look at this. 10-4 loud and clear. Look at that. Thank you, Lawrence. Thank you, Sophie. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah, I mean, the worst thing I can imagine is I'm sitting here for 50 minutes. Testing those out. The worst thing I can think of is I'm sitting here for 50 minutes chatting away, and no one can hear me. And we laugh about these things, but it has been done. It has been done in the dim and distant past. So it doesn't hurt to check. Good, thank you all. Good, there's lots of you on here today. So I know you're busy. I don't know about you lot, but you must be. I suspect you're rushed off your feet. So thank you very much for attending today. So time of housekeeping. I've got no fire drills planned at Hill House today. So if it does go off, it's because we have got a proper fire, but it's not likely. We'll be finished by 12. You can record this as part of your continuing competence should you wish. Obviously, CPD regime doesn't exist anymore. You don't have to do your 16 hours. You can do whatever you like. A huge thank you to Searches UK. If you don't already use them for your searches, please give them a go. Extremely capable, extremely professional. And I've got there Searches UK's contact details on the last slide. And I will say, just in case I forget this, we mentioned a couple of planning reports as we go through this. This is how we show planning in our planning reports. If you like one of these reports run on your own property or a property that you're familiar with, because these reports can be a little bit more for what's the right word, engaging if they're run on a property that if you're familiar with, then just email Searches UK or me direct, whichever you like, and I'll run one off free of charge for you, of course. If you've got any questions as we go along, just type them in the questions box. It's pretty small on my little presenter screen here, and if I miss it, or if I miss it in all the excitement, then I'll answer at the end. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. So what are we going to cover today? Let me just move this on. Well, we've got quite a lot to get through today. I'm a little bit evangelical about planning. Apologies have probably come over that way. I think planning should be included in every search pack, probably with the exception of remortgages on the basis that you might know the area slightly better if you already live there. But still, it would be useful for you to know about planning. It's not all negative. It can be extremely positive. For instance, in the last 10 years where I am down in Goring by Sea, I mean, we had some local shops that went up to much, but now there's been a bit more competition. We've got a Sainsbury's local, which is about a quarter of a mile away, and a quarter of a mile or half a mile in another direction, there's a Tesco's local, and it saves us having to, if we don't want to, drive a couple of miles to the nearest supermarket. So knowing this stuff can be extremely positive. So we're going to look at planning policy and legislation. I think we've got the oldest planning legislation in the world. Look at some planning case studies. We now capture large planning applications as polygons or boundaries. I'll explain what that means when we get there, and I'll show you what the benefit of that is, and then I'll finish on an all-in-one report that's got plan as a component part. So not many people, I think, would want to buy a property to find out soon afterwards there's going to be a development in the neighbourhood which could affect their use and enjoyment of the property as well as its value. Conveyancers have always carried out local authorities and COM29 searches, but these provide very little information outside of the target property. In fact, I think from memory, there is you normally search the boundary, but there are a couple of little bits, and I think it's in, or it was in, section 3 of the Code 29. I think 3.5 was nearby railway scheme. So is the property, or will it be, within 200 metres of the centre line of a proposed railway, tramway, light railway, or monorail? So that's proposed, and so if it's existing, you won't show it. Traffic schemes, I think it goes up to. I think the wording is has the local authority approved but not yet implemented any of the following for roads, footpath, footways, and footpaths, which are the boundaries of the property. So there's very little outside the property. And I mean, I don't know how many of you have been on one of these before, but I always mention the case. This is going back years and years. I've been with Landmark about 10 years now. But about 8 years ago, a conveyancer phoned me up and he said, "Do you do planning reports?" I said, yes, of course we do. And he said, "I've just had a call from a chap who completed," and he said he completed about 6 months ago. He said, "Why didn't you tell me?" This is a call from the chap that completed to the conveyancer. "Why didn't you tell me that the house opposite was going to be converted into 8 flats?" Now that could have easily been. I don't think that would concern me too much. It depends on whether it's a built-up area already, and it's subjective as well. I mean, I might love that, some people might hate it, or vice versa. But that 8 flats could have easily been, for instance, 20 or 80, and the higher the number, the more likely it's going to have an adverse, or the more likely your client is going to have an opinion. So this is subjective, good or bad. So the planning can be divided into 3 main headings: the property itself, the local area, and major and energy infrastructure projects such as HS2 and Crossrail. I think Crossrail 1 and 2 are largely positive. I think they're increasing or decreasing journey time across the capital. HS2 is a lot more tricky, shall we say. So there's a question of the property. Has it been changed in some way without having the necessary planning consent? In the worst case scenario, your client could buy a property only to find out the local planning authority was to take enforcement action in respect of part or all of the building. So it's important to establish there have been no breaches of planning law in the construction or use of the property. For example, it could be something as simple as an extension was built which did require but did not get planning permission. And it's also possible that the property's had a change of use without the required consent. So there are 2 rules here: the physical change, so the extension, for instance, has happened in the last 4 years, and has there been a change of use of property? So where it needed a consent but didn't get it. So an example could be a flat above a shop where the current planning consent only permits it to be used as a shop, for instance. So if you don't get planning, there could have been a breach of planning law and the local planning authority may take enforcement action. I'm not exactly sure where the property on the right is. I'm down here in West Sussex, and we had some work done on our property. We finished about a year ago. We went all in one go. By the way, we went front, back, side, and up, and we had to temper our plans. We had a quite modest looking extension, such that it looked like it could have been built this way, and we had trouble. We had to compromise with some of our lot, so we would never have gotten anything like this through. It doesn't even look safe, does it? So enforcement action. So enforcement action can be taken where a breach of planning has occurred. So I build without planning permission. So let me give you an example of that. So Mr. Fiddler is a farmer in Redhill, Surrey, quite famous these days. He decided he wanted to build a new house, but he thought he wouldn't bother with planning permission. Now, I'm not sure what it costs in Redhill. When we did ours, planning permission cost £156. I think it's 178 now. So, excuse me, in the grand scheme of what these things cost, i.e. the cost of the build, it's not much money really. So his solution was to build his property in secret behind 40-foot high walls of hay. It started in 2001, completed in June 2002, and moved in with his family. However, he kept it hidden behind the bales of hay for a further 4 years until July 2006. There you go, quite magnificent. Well done, Mr. Fiddler. Now, he did this because he thought he'd take advantage of the rule which provides immunity of service of an enforcement notice where 4 years have elapsed from the substantial completion of an operational development. So when he unveiled this house in 2006, the local planning authority weren't that impressed, and they served an enforcement notice. Now, this case generated quite a lot of publicity at the time, not least because Mr. Fiddler's house resembled a castle, complete with twin turrets. I think it even had a cannon somewhere at the bottom. Here it is, quite a modest sized one. Now, Mr. Fiddler brought proceedings to the High Court challenging the enforcement notice. And the judge held that the removal of the bales and plastic sheeting, that is the 40-foot high bales of hay, the judge held that the bales and plastic sheeting formed an intrinsic part of his overall building operations, and that the building operations weren't substantially complete until the bales were removed. So whilst the judge categorised the removal of the straw bales and tarpaulins as ancillary activities, he held as a matter of fact and agreed that they were nonetheless part of the overall building operation. So, I mean, this went to appeal. He was forced to take it down, but I think Mr. Fiddler had a couple of objections. He said he had to be near or quite close to his herd of cattle, quite reasonable probably. He also claimed he sold it to an Indian businessman, but he couldn't remember who it was, and there were no records of it. But he's forced to take it down. And when you look at the quality of the build, it looks like some kind of grain storage silo, a corrugated metal thing with looks like some polystyrene as insulation in between. Now that would never get past building control. Absolutely possibly a fire hazard. And then you've got the single skin brick. Outside it looks all right, but actually the overall build quality might not have been as good as you would like it if it was your property. Anyway, it came down. So this brings me quite nicely onto the localism act. So this enables local planning authorities to take action against landowners or house owners who attempt to deliberately conceal a bill, like Mr. Fiddler, that they needed but didn't get planning permission for. When it comes to the attention of the local planning authority that such a breach has occurred outside the time limits, so 4 years for fiscal change, 10 years for change of use, during which an enforcement notice could have been served, they will be able to apply to the local magistrates court for a planning enforcement order. So that little loophole that Mr. Fiddler thought he might get through has, at least in theory, been closed. In theory, as I say. The second thing we're going to look at is the local area. So local neighbourhoods will always change to a greater or a lesser extent. And as a general rule, the further from a property, the larger the development will have to be an impact. So, for instance, the house opposite being converted into 2 flats would be inconvenient for me. I think it wouldn't be ideal because we're in quite a quiet neighbourhood. We noticed that 8 flats would be even worse. But say 700 houses a couple of miles up the road, which there are, is actually quite inconvenient because the infrastructure, as it stands at the moment, can't support it. There's much more cars on the road, not necessarily at the moment, the lockdown, but once we're touch wood back on our feet and things return to whatever normal looks like, there will be a lot more cars on the road. So an example of this is if property next door is planning permission to demolish the existing house to build a block of flats, that would be pretty significant for your residential client, but it may be of little interest to the person at the other end of the road, what quarter of a mile away. On the other hand, everyone on the street would be concerned if the field opposite has planning permission to be developed, into several hundred houses. And at the extreme end, those infrastructure projects, such as ones at the bottom of the screen here, often at national scale that can affect whole communities. These kind of projects are often highly controversial. Perhaps the best example is the proposed HS2 line. So when is planning permission required? Well, as I said earlier, I think we have the oldest planning regime in the world dates back to 1947. And the most recent one of them, the Town Country Planning in 1990, remains the cornerstone legislation of the planning system. The key section is the meaning of development. So Section 55(1) development means the carrying out of building, engineering, mining, or other operations in, on, over, or under land, or the making of any material change in the use of any buildings or other land. So we've seen there are two parts of this section. The first is the fiscal doing. We've mentioned this a couple of slides ago, such as building a property or an extension. Usually it'd be reasonably obvious by looking at the land that some kind of fiscal development had gone on. And the second part is the change of use. Now here, from a fiscal inspection, it might not be that apparent that change of use happened. So perhaps changing a house into an HMO or a house of multiple occupation, it may not be that clear. That brings me on to the Growth and Infrastructure Act. Now, this was the government's flagship legislation designed to promote the economy going back some years. It was aimed to help developers. For example, in the case of village greens, land cannot be registered as village green if certain trigger events have occurred, such as planning application for the land, where not that long ago you could have done it the other way around. So the landowner would apply for planning permission, and then local residents could apply to have that land turned into a village green and block the planning. Also, the Planning Act 2008 is quite interesting to know. So, I mean, this was, I guess it was in the last 10 years or so, and especially under the last coalition government, so before Boris, new planning and policy was introduced. So I think it was George Osborne, but I can't quite remember. Key members of the coalition government believed that planning permission was often hindering economic growth, and therefore the planning rules should be relaxed, making things easier for developers. Perhaps the clearest example of this is under the 2012 National Planning Policy Framework, which says that the purpose of the planning system is to contribute to the achievement of sustainable development. And a lot of people have interpreted this as a general presumption for development. Now, planning permission for Terminal 5 at Heathrow was a very painful experience for the government. It was the longest planning inquiry in British history and took nearly 4 years just for the hearing. And the figure on the screen there, £800 million, that's not the cost of building Terminal 5, that's the cost of the hearing. And you and I, the taxpayers, are paying for that. And the Planning Act of 2008 came into being largely as a result of this experience and the need to have a much faster process for major infrastructure projects. And the three main rules: firstly, the question of whether the infrastructure project is needed is decided by the government. It's not a matter for the local planning inquiry. Secondly, it streamlined the number of consents that would be required. And thirdly, this is subject to judicial review and final decision taken by Secretary of State. I've got a couple of bits on permitted development rights. I mean, this came out in, was it May 2013? I think I've got that on the slide. You can have extensions to the rear up 6 meters in depth, can't be more than a single story. There you go, May 2013. It was originally for 3 years, and then it was extended to 2019, and now it's permanent. You can go up to 3 meters for semi-detached. It should be 6 meters for detached. Apologies. You must still write to the local authority. You must consult with immediate neighbours, left, right, back and forward. You should get, at least in theory, confirmation from the local authority within 40 days. You still need building regs. Building regs are hugely important. It's like the quality control of the planning world, and they will make sure that for instance, that the depths of the foundations, I'm thinking about this in chronological order, that the depths of the foundations will be suitable depth and width to support the extra weight of the building on top of it, and make sure that the any beams needed to support the weight are of adequate size and strength and length. I mean, as an example of this, when we had our extensions done, which were finished about a year ago, I think the planning permission was something like £156, but the building regs came in at about, I can't remember, it was about £1,100 or £1,200. Years ago, it used to be free. It used to be run, not for costing. It used to be free and included in the planning, but these days it's not. So we had the planning officer round here at regular intervals, and they actually went through we had a structural engineer to design the steels for to support the room in the loft. And actually, the planning officer insisted that some of the steels were beefed up. So it's actually quite a good thing to have. So you still need building regs, but it's in my opinion extremely important to have it. So this has been made permanent. A couple of changes to commercial here. Around A1 shops and financial professional services, food, hot takeaways, betting shops. To change of use into an office, should you want. Hot food takeaways change to residential, and there's no extension of permitted development rights for storage to residential use. That finished last June. A couple of fairly sensible updates on coronavirus. So this is almost a year ago. Council meetings, understandably, are remote now. Relaxation of plans to allow clubs and restaurants. Subject to change, this is to become hot food takeaways. You can remember when they closed, and then the last lockdown eased slightly so that you could go and you could get takeaways, food and drink takeaways. But like I say, that's subject to lockdown measures which do trump them. And there's temporary permitted development rights for the medical facilities, so the Nightingales, the ones up in, the nearest one for me was at the Excel in London, but there's quite a few of them throughout the country. Bill, Boris said last July. It was around new homes without planning permission, so the government announced a permanent extension to the permitted development rights, subject to, and this is the devil's in the detail here, subject to the neighbour consultation scheme. So you're able to build above your house, but there's loads of caveats with this. You know, earlier I said we had to temper our plans for extensions here. We would have bigger rooms in the roof, but it was turned down on the basis of overdevelopment. I think overdevelopment of the site. I think, and I thought, great. When I saw this last year, I thought, well, we can go ahead and we can build what we wanted to build at the outset, but there are caveats, and I'll show you. I'll go through that. I think it's on the next slide. It's subject to neighbour consultation. So if your neighbours, or if enough of them object to it, I mean, it's almost the same as going through planning permission anyway, then it's likely they won't get done. And yet the local authorities will take this into account, and it may override depending on the reason for their consultation, but depending on what they say, that the overriding permitted development could be overridden in those terms, in those cases. So the caveats, so up to 2 additional stories where the existing house consists of 2 or more, or 1 if you only have 1 story. So if you're a bungalow and you haven't gone into the roof, you can't go up 2 stories. You can only go up 1 story under this scheme. And this is the biggie. So the property must have been constructed after July 1948 and before October 2018. So for us down here, our house was built, or bungalow as it was built in the 30s. So we couldn't have our beloved larger rooms in the roof, so because we're kicked out by the state range. Also, you can't do it if you've already had additional stories added to the original properties. Highest part of the roof can't exceed 18 metres, excuse me. The external materials must be similar to those used in existence. And if anyone tried to get around that by using perhaps cheaper materials that didn't match, then that would be picked up under building regulations and the inspections that those entail as well. And you can't include a window in any part of the wall or roof on a side elevation of the house. So it's protecting privacy, your neighbour's privacy. Any application for prior approval is necessary and can be refused by the local planning authority on the basis that it doesn't comply with I've put in there, extensive restrictions. It's meant to restrict the powers of local councils to prevent developments going ahead, but it is subject to neighbourhood consultation. You still need building regs, which is absolutely essential, certainly for the quality of the build. And this is a little bit like the 2008 Planning Act, where the government believes the planning system is still a block on economic growth. Also for flats, so this is for commercials, so flats with at least 3 stories can be extended upwards by additional 2 stories. So that's quite good without planning permission. You still need building regs, of course. There's a couple of exclusions here. So pubs, libraries, village shops and other buildings will not be covered because they form part of the fabric of areas. So it is relaxed. I mean, it didn't fall in our favour down here in Sussex because we're outside of that date range. You know, we're in the 30s, and the date range I think was 1948 to 2018. So it won't. It's not. It's not a panacea. It's not a cure-all. It's just a slight. It's not slight. It's a big relaxation of the plan. Now, I did say earlier I'm a little bit evangelical about planning. Apologies for this, but I've got a couple of case studies here that illustrate my enthusiasm. So, if your clients are buying for a view, so this is some flats called Marine Gates, just to the east of Brighton, right on the seafront near Rottingdean, and it overlooks the sea and Brighton Marina. It predates Brighton Marine. The marina was built about 30-something years ago, but it's largely at low level. So you have reasonably good, well, not reasonably, you have lovely sea views there. So here you go. Here's a planning report. So we've got 2 applications within 750 metres for over 50 dwellings. And here you go. It's planning for, so this is done in phases at the marina. There's going to be 3 buildings ranging from 9 to 28 stories. And I think the highest story there at the moment, you can't see it on that photograph or that graphic on the left there. The highest story from memory is about, or was about 4 stories. It's some residential flats to the left of there that you can't quite see. So this is going to affect the view in a big way. Let me show you. There you go. It's right in the front. 2 applications within 750 metres, over 50 dwellings. So that's a large residential application for us. And there you go. It's number 9, right in front of Marine Gate. So if you're buying a property in Marine Gate, lovely as they are for uninterrupted sea views, this is what's happening. I mean, still, the views here are still, fantastic. I think you can see Marine Gate to the right there, and there's the architect's impression of what the flats are going to be like. So they're directly in front, but I still think it's a marvelous place to live. But if your client thinks that will affect them adversely, it would certainly be useful for them to know before they commit to the purchase. If I was buying a flat in Marine Gate, I don't think that would, personally, I don't think that would bother me. Here's a case in Hollingworth in Hyde, so this is in southeast Greater Manchester. The property we were asked to search is where the car is in the left-hand property. It enjoys what I would call very nice views over what looks like a playing field, and depending on where it is, Hollingworth is in Greater southeast Manchester, could be the Peak District there. So, I'm told you that you should never buy for a view, but personally, I would pay more for this property than a property round the corner that, nice as it is, overlooks another row of terrace houses. For me, this carries a premium. I don't know how much. It depends on how many pennies we've got to spend, all the rest of it. But this is worth more to me than a house without this view. So here's the planning report. It shows 7 applications for between 10 and 50 dwellings within 250 metres. There's the property just on about where the eye in Hollingworth is, and there's the football ground opposite. And number 2, which is just below the 100 metres radius. There you go, there's the new build, 38 houses on the former pub. So it's going to be on the football ground here. Now, if briefly needed, I've cross-referenced this to the information in the local planning portal. And there you go, a demolition of the pub and erection of 38 2, 3 and 4 bed houses. And you can get a lot of information from the planning portal. So here's the developer's map or site plan. And even if you think that every single one of these properties will be the nicest they possibly can, because the developer will want to get as much money as they can for each plot, nevertheless, the view is changing. It is subjective. I might think, oh, there's 38 more pals to make, or if I own a convenience store, perhaps not that far away from here, I've got a greater demand for the products I'm selling, you know, as more people sell them to. Or I might not like it, I might have enjoyed the view, but nevertheless, the view is changing, the landscape's changing. Now, whether it will affect your client's use and enjoyment of it is completely subjective. They may have hated that open space. It might have been, you know, badly maintained. It might have been a complete mess. So having developed could be the best thing that can happen. But we should at least tell buyers about this, and they can make up their own mind. Here's another one in Southampton. So I've not drawn the boundary very well. For those of you with colour monitors, the red boundary should go down to the highways at Archers Road and back a bit further. And Glen Court, the one edged in yellow to the right, should go down to the highway, you know, Archers Road. But you get the idea. Here's 39 Archers Road. I was going to say it's changed. Well, what's on it has changed. And geographically, it hasn't changed. And there's a 3-storey block of flats being built on it, quite close to Glen Court here. You know, you could, those are downpubs there, so you could argue, well, they're using bathrooms and kitchens, but they're fairly close to Glen Court. And now our report, there you go, there's the map, there's Archers Road on the corner. So ours showed, whoops, 9 applications within 250 metres for up to 10 dwellings. And when you have a look inside the report, this is an unusual one because 39 Archers Road, look at the bottom one. March 2008 planning permission was refused for 11 flats at 39 Archers Road. And to the layperson, you might think, oh, well, that's it. The developer will either temper their plans, you know, perhaps put in planning permission for who knows what, 10, 9, 8, 7 flats, or they might go away. That'd be quite nice, depending on how you view these things. But no, 3.5 years later, planning permission was granted on exactly the same site for 20 flats. Not a much larger footprint either, just an extra 6.1 square meters. There's something they've done to change the local authority's mind, and there are now 20 flats being built there rather than the 11 that was first planned for. So just because planning permission has been turned down doesn't mean that it won't go ahead in some guise in the future. And there's the last one here. You may have seen this a few years ago now. Mr. and Mrs. Thorpe bought Oakwood Lodge in Droitwich, and they completed in October 2010. A month or so later, outline permission was granted for 740 properties. Mrs. Thorpe objects against the planning, as you might do. And here's the wording from her objection. I live on Pulley Lane, which I'm very concerned about the prospect of an extensive new development in the area between Roman Way and Copcot Lane, Solwap. I already have difficulty turning right across the A38 when I exit Pulley Lane in the direction of Droitwich due to the number of vehicles already using the A38 daily. Consequently, the thought of a significant increase in traffic and the safety issues this raises is a major source of concern to me. So, despite her objections, the planning permission was granted in September 2013. This case went to court, and the buyer's case was, the Thorpe's case was that the truthful answers to the questions in the property information form would have revealed proposals for large-scale development in the vicinity of the property, which would have caused them to withdraw from the purchase. So Thorpe's were the buyers, Abbott's were the sellers. So the Abbott's said that their answers were true because the only development in prospect at the time of sale was one which does not affect the property, and so was not required to be disclosed by them. So that's really key. It does not affect the property being property they were selling in Droitwich. And they said the possibility, which is simply reality, of development at another site which may affect the property was not such as to require disclosure. So because it was, you'll see where it was in a second, it was not that far away, but they said it did not require disclosure. So the sales property information form at the time in section 3 said, has the seller either sent or received any communication or notices which in any way affect the property, for example, from or to neighbours, council or government department? Has the seller had any negotiations or discussions with any neighbour or any local or other authority affecting the property in any way? They said no to both of these. So this is the Abbott's, the sellers, they said no. they didn't think it affected the property. Here's our planning report, 5 applications within 750 metres for over 50 dwellings, right on the front sheet. And here's inside the report. There's Oakwood Lodge, that's the red dot in the middle. It does look lovely, actually. And then just a little bit further into the report, let me draw your attention to diamonds 1, 2, 3, and 4. And there's the property in purple in the middle now. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. There's Oakwood Lodge, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, we show these in our planning report. So these large developments are done in phases. So there you go, number 2, mixed-use development, 740 residential units, 265 in phase in number 3, number 4, 740 units, offices, shops, cafes. So it's a fairly large development that the Thorpes didn't know was going to go ahead. Now, I thought it was unusual at the time that the court ruled in favour of the Abbots, saying that their answers weren't misrepresentations. He said that the words communicating and affecting used should be given a confined interpretation in favour of the seller. And this wording is interesting. So the starting point of a conveyancing transaction is still buyer beware. And the questions asked in the property information form are tended to be capable of answer by a layperson and should not be interpreted in such a way that expert advice would be needed to understand the information required. The other questions in the information form were consistent with an interpretation of the inquiry raised by Section 3 was to matters which were either directly about the property itself or were concerning immediately adjoining properties, not regarding planning proposals a distance away from the property. The last bit on this, a discussion with someone not in a position to carry out or authorise the proposal, such as a local resident, would not affect the property because the outcome of the discussion would have no bearing on whether the proposal went ahead or not. And there's the last bit. To find otherwise would mean that sellers were required to disclose matters that may be no more than gossip. The court decided these terms should not be constructed too widely so as to force sellers to disclose speculative and remote information. And there needs to be a degree of certainty that an event was likely to happen and would affect the property before an obligation to disclose arose. And the court decided that the influence of the development on value alone was not enough to require disclosure. They didn't say that it wouldn't affect the value, they just said that it was not enough to require disclosure. So slightly frustrating for the Thorpes there. I've mentioned earlier there is planning information in the local search, but it's confined to the curtilage or the boundary of the property. As I said earlier, section 3.5 is on is the property or will it be within 200 metres of the centre line of a proposed railway, tramway, or light railway or monorail, as a bit of traffic or proposed traffic schemes information, but no planning permission outside of the property in the local search. So in our planning report, what else have we got? Well, we've got land use designation. So open land is more likely to be developed than greenbelt land, and the graphic on the left here is the football ground was open land. We also show rights of way, and we show education within 5 kilometres or in old money 3 miles. And here's an example of this. So here's the schools. If my daughter was going to this school, wherever this area is, PO, Portsmouth or Chichester, it looks like, down in Sussex. The one she's going to is number 23, the outstanding one. And when she's old enough for secondary education, she's definitely not going to a school that requires improvement unless it changes. And if she wants to go to a, what's this performing arts, so a drama or stage school, I expect, she's more than welcome to, but she's not going to one that, in my opinion, requires improvement unless it changes before, before she goes. And there's lots of amenities here. So my elderly parents, we joke about it, but they want to be near local shops and a bus stop. So we show where is the nearest post box, convenience store, cinema, library, or bus stop, railway station, local doctors, dentists, chemists, vets, fast food outlets, restaurants, pubs, bars and inns, convenience stores, supermarkets, DIY stores. You get the pictures. Gyms, golf courses, golf ranges, playgrounds. There's an awful lot of information here, and it costs £30 or £31 plus VAT. It's extremely practical report. Now, I did say I was just going to finish on, or penultimately, I mentioned polygons. So we include where possible large planning application patches captured as polygons. So let me show you an example of this. So here's a plan search plus. It's complete. We show 6 applications for over 50 dwellings within 750 meters. So there's the property right in the middle, and the cross-hatching are planned developments. So what have we got there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So you can these would normally be displayed, I say normally, by other planning report providers as a point, and they go out to, depending on which one you use, 150 meters or 500 meters. We go out to 750 meters. But if this planning application, it's a phase development, it's a very big one, if it was located to a point outside of 500 meters, which is commonly how planning applications are shown, i.e. as a point rather than a boundary, if it's shown outside 500 meters, despite the size and the location of this development, it would not show in any other planning report. So showing these as polygons or boundaries, so the full extent of the application, is absolutely crucial. We don't do it with all of them because not all local authorities provide planning applications as boundaries. You know, some of them still do it as points, but I think we're up to 76% in the UK. So here you go. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think we had. There's 193 dwellings in one phase, 143 in another, 700 in number 3, 4 is 141. Anyway, you get the picture. It's a large phased development that, if it was shown as a point, might not show that in another planning report. So there it is. And there's there's all the phases in detail. Phase 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And phase 5 down here, they pack a lot into this. So it's a big development. So if you find this property, and you were unaware of it, it would be a surprise. So there you go. There's number 5, 423 properties down there. And I did say I'd finish on. Let me look at the time. Just finishing time. I said I'd finish on something called risk view residential. So we have an all-in-one. We call it an all-in-one report. It covers contaminated land, flood, energy and infrastructure, ground hazards, so that's mining and stability and radon, and planning application. So we say it's built for the digital age because it's in 2 parts. There's a PDF that you get. It's between, I think, 11 and 14 pages. And if you click on the front page, it opens up a web page where you see the information shown in a digital format. So a web page, which is how a lot of people prefer to see the information rather than thumbing through pages of the PDF. So we show the information in 2 ways. You can use either. We don't charge. If you don't want to use the web version, you don't have to. If you don't want to use the PDF version, just go straight through. We're not fussed. We don't charge any extra for using them both. It's completely up to you and your client. At the moment, we have 3 reorders for this, so there are some delays getting purchases to exchange and then complete. So if you find that what you might order this report fairly on in the transaction from Searches UK, if you find that it's not recent enough for either you or the lender, for instance, just contact Searches UK and we'll rerun one free of charge for you. We've also got the highest remediation contribution. What this means is if the land is found to be contaminated by the local authority within 3 years of the date of the report, we'll pay up to £250,000 to remediate the contamination. There's a £0 excess with this. I think our competitors go up to either 60 or 100,000, and there's an excess of £5,000 if you buy a competitor's report and the land's found to be contaminated. Your client will have to pay the first £5,000. If you buy a landmark report, they won't have to pay a penny. Here's a little bit on the web page of it, because I've got a finite amount of time. I just thought I'd show you the planning application. So here you go, I've clicked on the front page of the PDF and gone down to planning applications. And if I want to, I can see, I click on the house edged in red there, and I can see there's 10 to 50 dwellings. Application was refused first of all. That's refused twice. And if I want to see more information on that, click on that reference, and that takes me, that's a hyperlink that takes me through to that particular planning application. So you can see more details on it, see the comments, see the maps. And it's refused in this case, doesn't mean it won't go ahead in some case. So why would you want an all-in-one report? Well, it's fairly simple, really. It is all in one. There's less to look at, less to post. Why would you want multiple reports? It complies with the law sites contaminated land and the flood risk practice notes. If you order a contaminated land report and there's a standard, and then perhaps through the Excellent Searches UK ordering platform, there's an alert for flooding. Well, the advice is if there is an alert for flooding, for instance, you should order a flood report. Well, there's no need for this. And if there is an alert for flooding, what do? You go to your client, email them and say, we've had an alert for flooding, and please can we order a flood report? If there isn't enough money in the client account, please get another £20 or whatever it costs. What if they don't reply? What if they say no? So again, you've got a right to say, okay, well, we won't do it, but you understand there is still a risk, and our recommendation is blah, blah. So there's a lot of toing and froing. It stops all that. Then I have to look at multiple reports. We only include the risks if there are any in the PDF, and you can look at the viewer for all the data should you wish to. Less to print, less to post. I think postage now, even for a letter, something like 71, is it 72p? And we like the online viewer. I think it's the way things are going. Seeing everything that you want to in a digital format, so in a web page, I think it's got to be the way forward. And it's a fixed cost, so there's none of this, getting an extra X pounds for this and X pounds for that. This is the only report you need, apart from local authority, drains and water, maybe chancellor, check or insure, depending on which you prefer. So I think clients will want to know planning information that could affect their use and enjoyment of the property. I think that's fairly sensible. Apologies for being a little bit evangelical about this. The local authority search just looks at the property apart from proposed nearby railway schemes, and our planning reports and the risk for your residential, so that's all in one report. And our commercial planning report looks at wider community issues as well. And if you'd like to know more, let me draw your attention to the Landmark Academy. It offers free online training from the UK's leading environmental law experts. It provides current and practical advice to property lawyers and conveyancers, giving guidance on all aspects of environmental and property searches. We don't charge for it. We probably should do. It's absolutely huge now. It's growing and growing. Just go to landmarkacademyhub.co.uk. You have to register, but there's no cost to it. And you can see there's loads of videos, articles, blogs on, for instance, planning, flooding, ground stability, contamination. So it would help fulfill your continuing competence, should you wish to. And lastly, thank you to Searches UK, Sam Manning, Searches UK. If you've got any questions, just email marketing@searchesuK.co.uk, or you can always, if you're a bit old-fashioned like me, you can always give them a ring. And if you would like a free report on your own property, just email me, either email Sam, which is marketing, Sam or Richard, marketing@searchesuK.co.uk, or myself, philip.hill@landmark.co.uk. And I said earlier, sometimes these reports can be a little bit more engaging if they're run on a report that you're familiar with, excuse me. So either your own property or one in a matter that you're currently dealing with. Okay, I am going to stop now. I did say we'd have you away by 12 o'clock. I'm slightly earlier, so we've got about 10 minutes. Thank you very much for listening, and enjoy the rest of your day.